The lake was a mirror of fire, swallowing the sunset whole, and I was drowning in it literally. My kayak had flipped, dumping me into the icy grip of Lake Wisteria, and now I stood shivering on the shore, my clothes plastered to my skin like a second, sodden self. Ethan, my best friend, was still out there, laughing like a maniac as he paddled in circles, oblivious to the fact that I was one bad shiver away from hypothermia. "Jasper, you look like a drowned rat," Ethan hollered, his voice echoing across the water. I flipped him off, teeth chattering, and tried to wring out my shirt. It was late August in upstate New York, the kind of summer evening that promised warmth but delivered a chill the second the sun dipped low. I was 22, fresh out of college, and crashing at Ethan's family cabin for a week before real life sank its claws into me. This was supposed to be my last gasp of freedom, not a near-death experience by kayak. Then I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. "You all right, kid?" The voice was deep, steady, like the rumble of a distant storm. I turned, and there he was, Mr. Callahan, Ethan's dad, standing on the path to the cabin, a towel slung over his shoulder. At 45, Daniel Callahan was the kind of man who made you double take, broad shoulders, salt and pepper hair, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He'd always been a quiet fixture in Ethan's life, the strong, silent type who fixed leaky pipes and grilled steaks without fanfare. But now, those hazel eyes locked on me, and I felt something shift, like the ground wasn't as solid as it seemed. "I'm fine," I stammered, my voice betraying me as much as my trembling hands. "Just wet." Daniel's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Come dry off," he said, jerking his head toward the cabin. "You'll catch your death out here." His tone was casual, but there was a weight to it, an invitation that felt like more than just a towel and a warm room. I couldn't say non it because I didn't want to, but because something in his gaze made my pulse stutter, like I was standing on the edge of something dangerous and thrilling. The cabin was a haven of pine and flannel, the kind of place that smelled like cedar and old memories. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave, thawing my fingers as Daniel tossed me the towel. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said, pointing. "Get out of those clothes. I'll find you something dry." I nodded, my throat tight, and shuffled to the bathroom. The mirror showed a mess, my dark hair plastered to my forehead, my blue eyes wide with something I couldn't name. I peeled off my shirt, the fabric sticking stubbornly, and tried to ignore the way my heart was hammering. This was Ethan's dad, for God's sake. I'd known him since I was 15, back when he was just the guy who drove us to soccer practice. But now, alone in his cabin, with his voice echoing in my head, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. When I stepped out, towel wrapped around my waist, Daniel was waiting in the living room, holding a folded stack of clothes. "These should fit," he said, his eyes flicking over me, quick but deliberate. My skin prickled under his gaze, and I clutched the towel tighter, suddenly hyper-aware of every inch of exposed skin. "Thanks," I mumbled, taking the Clothisa soft flannel shirt and sweatpants that smelled faintly of him, like pine and something muskier. I retreated to the bathroom to change, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. The shirt was too big, the sleeves swallowing my hands, but it felt safe, like armor, or maybe a promise. Back in the living room, Daniel was stoking the fireplace, the flames casting shadows across his face. "Better?" he asked, not looking up. "Yeah," I said, sinking into the couch. "Thanks, Mr. Callahan." "Call me Daniel," he said, and this time, he did look up. His eyes held mine, steady and unreadable, and for a moment, The world narrowed to just us, the crackle of the fire, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Ethan burst through the door then, dripping wet and grinning. "Dude, you should have seen your face when you flipped," he crowed, oblivious to the tension. Daniel's expression shifted, the moment broken, and he went back to tending the fire. But as Ethan rambled on, I caught Daniel stealing another glance at me, and my stomach flipped. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the flannel shirt still wrapped around me like a secret. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Daniel had looked at me, the way his voice had felt like a tether pulling me closer. I was Jasper Klein, small-town kid with big dreams and a bigger fear of screwing everything up. And Daniel Callahan was, what? A man I'd known for years, but suddenly didn't know at all. The lake had soaked me to the bone, but it was Daniel's words, "come dry off," that left me feeling exposed, raw, and dangerously alive. The next morning, the cabin smelled of coffee and bacon, a grounding comfort that did little to quiet the storm in my chest. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying that moment by the fire, Daniel's eyes, the way they'd lingered like he was seeing something I hadn't dared show anyone. I pulled on his flannel again, the fabric soft against my skin, and told myself it was just practical, not personal. Ethan was sprawled at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, his blonde hair a mess. "You look like you got hit by a truck," he said, not looking up. "Rough night." "Something like that," I muttered, avoiding his gaze. The truth was, I'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was wrong with me. I'd always known I wasn't like Ethan, chasing girls with the easy confidence of someone who never questioned himself. I'd had crushes quiet, confusing once-son guys at college, but I'd buried them deep, convinced they'd only bring trouble. Now, here I was, heart racing over my best friend's dad, of all people. Daniel walked in, carrying a plate of eggs and bacon. "Morning, Jasper," he said, his voice low and warm, like he was speaking just to me. He set the plate down in front of me, his fingers brushing mine for a split second. My breath caught, and I prayed Ethan didn't notice the way my face heated. "Thanks," I managed, focusing on the food like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Daniel sat across from us, sipping coffee, his presence filling the room like a low hum. Ethan launched into a story about some party back at school, but I could barely follow. My eyes kept drifting to Daniel, the way his hands wrapped around his mug, the faint scar on his knuckles, the quiet strength in his shoulders. After breakfast, Ethan dragged me out for a hike, insisting we make the most of the wilderness. The trail wound through dense pines, the air sharp with the scent of sap. I lagged behind, my thoughts tangled. Ethan was my anchor, the guy who'd been there through every awkward high school moment, every late-night crisis. But now, I felt like I was betraying him just by thinking about his dad. "You're quiet," Ethan said, pausing to tie his shoe. "What's up with you?" "Nothing," I lied, kicking a pebble. "Just thinking about the future. Job stuff." He snorted. "Dude, relax. You've got a whole week before you have to adult." If only it were that simple. Back at the cabin, Daniel was chopping wood outside, his flannel rolled up to his elbows. I stopped short, watching the steady rhythm of his axe, the way his muscles flexed under the fabric. Ethan bounded ahead, oblivious, but I felt rooted to the spot. "Need a hand?" I called, surprising myself. My voice sounded too eager, too loud. Daniel glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sure," he said, gesturing to a pile of logs. "Grab one." I fumbled with a log, my hands clumsy under his gaze. He stepped closer, showing me how to position it, his voice patient but firm. Like this, he said, his hand guiding mine. The touch was brief, professional, but it sent a jolt through me, like I'd brushed against a live wire. You're a natural, he said, and there it was again at half-smile, the one that made my stomach twist. I mumbled something incoherent and focused on the wood, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. That evening, Ethan suggested a campfire. We dragged chairs to the lake's edge, the stars sharp overhead. Daniel joined us, a beer in hand, his presence both comforting and unnerving. Ethan told ghost stories, his voice rising and falling with dramatic flair, but I kept stealing glances at Daniel. Once, our eyes met, and he held my gaze longer than he should have. My chest tightened, and I looked away, the fire's heat nothing compared to the burn inside me. As the night wound down, Ethan yawned and headed inside, leaving me and Daniel alone by the dying flames. The silence was heavy, charged. I should have followed Ethan, but my feet wouldn't move. You're not like most kids your age, Daniel said suddenly, his voice soft but piercing. There's depth to you. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I don't feel deep. I feel lost. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the firelight carving shadows across his face. You're not lost, Jasper. You're just figuring out where you're going. His words hit harder than they should have, like he'd seen the parts of me I kept hidden, the fear, the longing, the questions I didn't dare ask. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck. Instead, I nodded, my throat tight, and stared at the embers, wondering how a man I'd known for years could suddenly feel like the only person who saw me. The days blurred into a rhythm of lake, forest, and stolen glances. Every moment with Daniel felt like a tightrope walk, thrilling, dangerous, and impossible to turn back. I told myself it was nothing, just a crush born of proximity and too much time to think. But my body betrayed me with every heartbeat. On the fourth day, Ethan announced he was heading into town for supplies. You coming, Jasper? He asked, tossing his keys in the air. Nah, I said, too quickly. I'll stay. Help your dad with stuff. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but shrugged. Suit yourself. Don't let him work you too hard. As Ethan's truck rumbled away, the cabin felt too quiet, the air thick with possibility. Daniel was in the garage, tinkering with an old boat motor. I wandered in, pretending to be curious about the tools scattered on the workbench. Need something to do? Daniel asked, not looking up from the motor. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like he knew why I was really there. Sure, I said, grabbing a wrench like I knew what to do with it. He chuckled, a low sound that made my cheeks burn. Easy, kid. You'll strip the bolt. He stepped behind me, his chest brushing my shoulder as he adjusted my grip. His hands were warm, calloused, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Like this, he said, his breath tickling my ear. I nodded, my voice gone. We worked in silence, the clink of tools and the hum of the lake outside the only sounds. But the space between us crackled, every accidental touch a spark. When the motor roared to life, Daniel grinned, a rare, unguarded smile that made my chest ache. Good work, he said, clapping my shoulder. His hand lingered, and I wondered if he felt it through the pull, the heat, the thing we weren't naming. That afternoon, we took the boat out on the lake. The water was glass smooth, the world hushed except for the motor's low growl. Daniel steered, his eyes on the horizon, while I sat across from him, clutching the seat to keep my hands from shaking. You ever think about staying out here? He asked, cutting the engine. The boat drifted, rocking gently. away from all the noise. Sometimes, I admitted, but I don't know if I'm built for quiet. He studied me, his gaze piercing. You'd be surprised what you're built for, Jasper. The words hung there, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to unpack. I looked away, focusing on the water, but I could feel his eyes on me, steady and searching. When I finally met his gaze, something shifted to silent agreement that we were crossing a line, even if we didn't say it out loud. Back at the cabin, Ethan returned, arms full of groceries and stories about the town's quirky locals. I forced a laugh, played the part of the easygoing friend, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the memory of Daniel's touch, his words, his presence. That night, as we grilled burgers on the deck, I caught Daniel watching me again, his expression unreadable but intense. Ethan was oblivious, joking about some old high school prank, but I felt like I was burning from the inside out. Later, alone in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, Daniel's flannel draped over my shoulders. I'd kept it, claiming it was comfortable, but really, it was a piece of him I could hold on to. I traced the fabric, my fingers lingering on the buttons, and wondered what it would mean to give in to this feeling to let it consume me. The lake had pulled me under once, but it was Daniel who was drowning me now, and I wasn't sure I wanted to come up for air. The fifth day dawned gray, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Ethan was restless, pacing the cabin like a caged animal. "Let's go fishing," he declared, already grabbing rods from the shed. I agreed, desperate for a distraction from the tension coiling inside me. Daniel came along, his presence a quiet anchor as we set up on the dock. The lake was restless too, its surface rippling under the gathering clouds. Ethan cast his line with practiced ease, chattering about his plans for grad school, but I could barely focus. Daniel was beside me, his shoulder brushing mine as he baited my hook, his fingers steady where mine shook. "You're quiet today," he said softly, his voice just for me. "Just thinking," I mumbled, my eyes on the water. But I was thinking about him, about the way his hands moved, the way his voice seemed to wrap around me, the way I wanted to lean into him and see what happened next. The rain started mid-afternoon, a soft drizzle that turned into a downpour. Ethan cursed and bolted for the cabin, but Daniel grabbed my arm. "Wait," he said, his grip firm. "Let's stay a bit." We stood under the dock's overhang, the rain a curtain around us. The world felt smaller, just him and me, the patter of drops drowning out everything else. His flannel was damp, clinging to his shoulders, and I couldn't stop staring. "You're gonna get sick again," he said, but his eyes were warm, teasing. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him despite the chill. "You're shivering." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling, every nerve alight with the nearness of him. He reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was gentle, deliberate, and it broke something in me. "Jasper," he said, his voice rough, like he was fighting something too. "What are we doing?" I didn't have an answer, but I didn't pull away. His hand lingered, his thumb grazing my cheek, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. My heart pounded, a wild, reckless thing, and I leaned into his touch, just a fraction, just enough to say yes without words. But then Ethan's voice cut through the rain, calling us back to the cabin. Daniel dropped his hand, stepping back, and the moment shattered. We trudged inside, soaked and silent, but the air between us was electric, charged with what hadn't happened. That night, Ethan passed out early, sprawled on the couch with a beer in hand. Daniel and I ended up in the kitchen, cleaning up the dinner dishes. The silence was heavy, Every clink of plates a reminder of what we weren't saying. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low. "About earlier. I shouldn't have." "Don't." I cut him off, my heart racing. "Don't apologize. I wanted it." His eyes met mine, searching, and for a moment, I thought he'd close the distance between us. But he just nodded, his jaw tight, and turned back to the sink. I wanted to scream, to grab him, to make him see that I wasn't some kid with a crush, that this was real, raw, terrifying. Instead, I dried the last plate and went to bed, the weight of his touch still burning on my skin. The rain kept falling, a steady drumbeat that matched the chaos in my chest. I was falling for Daniel Callahan, and I didn't know how to stop her if I even wanted to. The 6th day was a reckoning. The rain had stopped, leaving the lake glassy and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Ethan, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, suggested a day trip to a nearby waterfall. I agreed, hoping the hike would clear my head, but Daniel's presence made that impossible. We trekked through the forest, Ethan leading the way, his chatter a constant hum. Daniel walked beside me, his step steady, his silence loud. Every brush of his arm against mine felt like a confession, every glance a question. I wanted to grab him, to demand answers, but Ethan was always there, a barrier we couldn't cross. At the waterfall, Ethan stripped to his boxers and dove in, whooping as he hit the water. I stayed on the rocks, my sneakers sinking into the damp moss. Daniel sat beside me, his knee brushing mine, and the world narrowed to that single point of contact. "You're quiet again," he said, his voice soft but probing. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "I don't know what this is." He looked out at the waterfall, his jaw tight. "It's complicated, Jasper. You're young. You're Ethan's friend. I'm not supposed to feel this way." The words hit like a punch, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. He felt it to the pull, the ache, the impossible want. I turned to him, my heart in my throat. "But you do." He met my gaze, his eyes raw. "Yeah, I do." For a moment, we just stared, the roar of the waterfall drowning out the world. Then Ethan's voice broke through, calling us to join him. Daniel stood, breaking the spell, but his hand brushed mine as he passed, a fleeting promise. That night, back at the cabin, Ethan suggested a movie. We piled onto the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, but I could barely focus on the screen. Daniel was on the other side of Ethan, his arm resting on the back of the couch, his fingers inches from my shoulder. Every nerve in my body was tuned to him, like a radio picking up a signal no one else could hear. When Ethan dozed off halfway through, the room felt too small, the air too thick. Daniel shifted, his hand brushing my neck, and I froze. "Jasper," he whispered, so soft I almost missed it. I turned, and his eyes were on me, dark and unguarded. "We can't," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. "I know," I whispered back, but I leaned closer, just enough to feel the heat of him. His hand moved, cupping the back of my neck, and for one heartbeat, I thought he'd pull me in. But then Ethan stirred, and Daniel pulled away, his face a mask of restraint. I went to bed that night with my heart in pieces, Daniel's flannel clutched in my hands. I wanted him, God. I wanted him, but he was right. This was complicated, messy, forbidden. He was Ethan's dad, older, wiser, and carrying a weight I couldn't fully understand. But the way he looked at me, the way he touched me, told me he was just as lost as I was. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized I didn't care about the complications. I didn't care about the rules. I just wanted to feel alive, to feel seen, to feel him. And that scared me more than anything. The 7th day was my last at the cabin, and it felt like a countdown to something inevitable. The air was crisp, the lake a mirror of the morning sky. But inside me, a storm was raging. I couldn't keep pretending this was nothing. Couldn't keep dodging the truth of what I felt for Daniel. Ethan was packing the truck, planning to drive me to the bus station tomorrow. I helped, hauling bags and coolers. But my mind was on Daniel, who was splitting wood again, his movements deliberate, almost angry. I wondered if he was fighting the same battle I was, wanting something he couldn't have. Mid-morning, Ethan got a call from a friend in town and decided to meet up for lunch. "You cool staying here?" he asked, already halfway out the door. "Yeah," I said, my heart leaping at the chance to be alone with Daniel. "I'll be fine." When Ethan's truck disappeared down the road, the cabin felt like a held breath. I found Daniel by the woodpile, his flannel unbuttoned, his chest glistening with sweat. He looked up, and for once, he didn't hide the hunger in his eyes. "Jasper," he said, his voice rough. "We need to talk." I nodded, my throat tight, and followed him inside. We stood in the living room, the fire unlit, the silence deafening. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like he was trying to outrun his thoughts. "This can't happen," he said finally, his voice strained. "You're Ethan's friend. I'm too old for you. It's wrong." "It doesn't feel wrong," I said, stepping closer. My voice shook, but I didn't care. "It feels like the only thing that makes sense." He froze, his eyes locked on mine. "You don't know what you're saying. You've got your whole life ahead of you. I'm a mess. Jasper." "Then be a mess with me," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't care about the age difference, or Ethan, or any of it. I need you." The words hung between us, raw and reckless. For a moment, I thought he'd turn away, shut me out. But then he closed the distance, his hands cupping my face, and kissed me. It was fierce, desperate, like he'd been holding back for years. I kissed him back, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The world fell away, leaving just us, just this. When we broke apart, gasping, his forehead pressed against mine. "God, Jasper," he whispered. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart pounding. "But I don't want to stop." He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. "We have to be careful. Ethan, he can't know." I nodded, the weight of that truth settling over me. This wasn't just about Use It, was about Ethan, about the life we'd all built together. But in that moment, I didn't care. I just wanted Daniel, wanted the way he made me feel alive, wanted whole. We spent the rest of the day stealing moments, his hand brushing mine as we passed in the kitchen. A quick kiss behind the shed, a shared glance that said everything we couldn't. It was reckless, dangerous, but it was ours. That night, as Ethan returned and we sat around the fire, I felt like I was living two lives, one with my best friend, laughing and joking, and one with Daniel, hidden in the spaces between words. I didn't know how long we could keep this up, but I knew I'd fight for it. For him. For us. The final morning broke with a clarity that felt like a judgment. The lake sparkled under a cloudless sky, and I stood on the dock, my bag packed, my heart heavy. Ethan was loading the truck, his voice carrying as he sang off-key to some old rock song. Daniel was inside, avoiding me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that last night's kiss was both a beginning and an end. I'd spent the night awake, replaying every moment, the taste of Daniel's lips, the roughness of his hands, The way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. But reality was creeping in, cold and unyielding. I was leaving today, heading back to a life of job applications and uncertainty. Daniel would stay here, tied to this cabin, to Ethan, to a world that didn't have room for us. Ethan called me over, and we climbed into the truck. Daniel emerged from the cabin, his expression guarded. "Take care, Jasper," he said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper. "You too," I said, my throat tight. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw everything we couldn't say: the longing, the fear, the love we'd barely begun to name. The drive to the bus station was a blur, Ethan's chatter a distant hum. I stared out the window, the lake shrinking in the rear view, and felt like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. When we pulled up, Ethan hugged me, oblivious to the weight I carried. "See you soon, man," he said, grinning. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Soon." On the bus, I pulled Daniel's flannel from my bag, the one I'd forgotten to return. I held it to my face, breathing in the faint scent of him, and let myself feel everything: the joy, the pain, the hope. I didn't know what came next, didn't know if we could ever be more than a stolen moment. But I knew I'd carry this week with me, a spark in the dark, a reminder that I was capable of feeling something so big it scared me. Months later, I got a Laterno return address, just a single sheet of paper in Daniel's steady handwriting. "Jasper," it read, "I don't know if this is right, but I can't stop thinking about you. I'm trying to be the man Ethan needs, the man I'm supposed to be, but you've changed me. If you ever want to try, I'm here. D." I sat in my tiny apartment, the city buzzing outside, and read those words until they blurred. I didn't know if I'd go back, if I'd risk everything for a chance at something real. But I knew I'd never forget the lake, the cabin, the man who saw me when I was too afraid to see myself. Love, I realized, wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being brave enough to ask the questions, to fight for the truth, to let yourself be seen. And so, I folded the letter, tucked it into the pocket of Daniel's flannel, and stepped into the unknown, carrying the weight of his words and the promise of what might be.